on the last one, and then we can have lunch, so bear with me. So hi, my name is Jacky, and I'm a master's student at the Department of Art and Education at Concordia University. I will be presenting my research on museums and accessibility, institutional experience, my interview with museums. So the keywords for this presentation and also my paper are museum barriers, knowledge, surveillance, architecture, access, art spaces, and art education. So I want you to think about the last time you visited a museum. How was it? How did it make you feel? Were you comfortable? Was it inviting? Or have you not thought about it with all the art around? As someone who lives with a non-visible disability, I think it's important to think about the accessibility of experiencing things and the barriers limiting others to achieve the same experience. Art as a field is known for its advocacy on tackling social justice issues. However, the system and museums that houses these artworks are often discouraging to public. Despite accessibility efforts like entrances, routes, public art, audio guides, paid-by-donation days, and public programming in museum spaces, my research asks the question, what kind of barriers, physical or non-physical, discourage the public to go to museums? As part of my investigation, I visited two museums, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the Met, and the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, the MMFA, in Montreal, in an attempt to find answers through my experience of these spaces. In this presentation, I'll be examining my methodological process of critical ethnography and expanding my data using critical social theory, disability studies, and museology with visuals. I plan to demonstrate my findings and data in visual maps. My objective was to collect my data visiting 2 to 3 museums at least twice. I would then record my experience through on-site journaling, field notes, photography, and videos. With critical theory in mind, I relied heavily on direct observation or participant observation, which meant recording how I felt, what I saw, and my thoughts on that moment. Before I show my data, I wanted to reference 2 artists tackling similar issues for my project and the guidelines I used to base my field notes on. So the first artist I'll be introducing is Andrea Fraser and her performance piece on Welcome to the Radsworth, a Museum Tour. She explores a persona of an archetypical museum docent. She leads a museum tour, and through questions and conversation, she deals with the relationship between herself, the museum, and the museum's public. She asks the question, what does the museum want for and of its public? She scours through annual reports, members' calendars, and other published documents, and how the museum presents itself for answers. Another artist I want to reference is Fred Wilson in Mining the Museum. And in this exhibition, he questions and deconstructs the traditional way we saw art and artifacts. He changes wall labels, lighting, placement, showcasing audiences that changing the context will change its meanings. Demonstrating the biases museums have and often omitting and underrepresenting marginalized groups. In this specific case, it was the African and Native Americans. Like these artists, I think it's important to understand the roles galleries and museums have in order for us to move further in the arts and creating more inviting spaces that are inclusive to everyone. One of my frameworks I used was Universal Design for Learning, UDL, in my data collection. So UDL creates and implements learning and teaching methods that reduces barriers in the environment and makes learning accessible for everyone. It also takes account on individual different learning backgrounds, understanding the needs and learning styles. Here in the image for UDL is broken into 3 guidelines. So the first guideline is to provide multiple methods of representation. And so that could mean options of perception, as well as like language and symbols, as well as comprehension. The second guideline is multiple means of expression. So options for physical action, options for expressive skills and fluency, and options for executive functions. The third and last one is engagement. So providing options for recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, as well as options for self-regulating. Another resource and framework I used was from the Critical Design Lab in Toronto. So they are a multidisciplinary art and design collaborative centered in disability, culture, and technoscience. Their work pivots around the concept of access. They embrace interdependent as a political technology and design methodology. So they treat accessibility as a research creation and aesthetic world building practice and an invitation to assemble the community. This collaborative provides resources and guidelines on creating inclusive environments for the public on their webpage designed by the disability community. So thinking and using the resources of UDL and Critical Design Lab, I based my field notes on these principles. I would code my data starting with what I felt was encouraging and discouraging on different days of each museum. And after the process, I was able to find similar or same categories on both sides. And it was broken down to 4. So the first one was knowledge and information. The second one was entrance ticketing. The third one, surveillance. And the fourth one is architecture. So based on these 4 themes, I made visual maps to represent my data. So I'm going to talk about what I found in my results in the similarities. So both museums provided options when it came to accessibility. So for entrance and ticketing, they both have wheelchair accessible entrances and routes. And if you did get lost, there was also docents and guards to kind of guide you to where you needed to go. They both have free Wi-Fi access, so that meant you could do audio guides, and most of the works also had descriptions, specifically in the contemporary art sections. And during the time of research, they took COVID precautions very seriously, so all these are factors that were encouraging. So for the discouraging factors, both museums could not provide audio devices and headphones. So that meant if you didn't have a phone or you didn't bring headphones, you wouldn't have the same experience. And certain people didn't also have the technological skill sets to maybe use the devices. So that was like a level of not really accessible. The audio and text were either in English or both in French and English. And so this could be also problematic in certain sections of the exhibit, which represent certain cultures, and certain of those cultures' languages were not represented. And quite often, the accessibility roads would also distract the flow of the show. So a lot of the curators didn't really plan for accessibility in that sense. So if you're a person with a wheelchair or not able-bodied person, you would experience certain things again, and you wouldn't even be able to see the flow of the show as it was intended to be. Another thing that was really big for me was actually being watched and bag checked. So in that experience, a lot of the times the guards weren't very friendly, and the water was also not provided. And specifically for the Met, water would then be $5 to $12. If you go to the cafe, it would be around $12, and if you buy it from the vending machine, it would be $5. And that's kind of crazy because it's almost like a basic need for a lot of people enjoying these kind of exhibitions. And same thing with food. So in that case, if you want to bring a snack, because it was a long day, you couldn't bring the food, you would have to kind of purchase it in the museum cafes. Another thing was also the admission. So it was very pricey, and a lot of times the prices weren't shown until you go over to the desk or you checked online. So if you decided in the last moment you didn't want to go to this museum or the show, it would be kind of embarrassing for you to kind of turn around and be like, oh, I didn't expect it was this pricing. So let's talk about the differences of the two institutions. So seating was one of the big ones for me because at the Met, I wasn't sure if I could sit on them or if there were artworks. But in the MMFA, it was much more clear that this is for sure seating. And this is very important for those who maybe want to have a rest or they're just tired and it could be kind of scary, not maybe sitting on some artwork. The MFFA, it was also had much more interactive when it came to, let's say, the audio guides, as well as they had a QR code where you can scan, and it also featured Canadian celebrities as well as museum staff who was kind of guiding of what the work meant to them and kind of had open questions, and it had both English and French and closed captioning. As for the Met, in comparison, the Met, a lot of their audio guides, when you tried using it, didn't work or was kind of unavailable, and again, it was only in one language. And for the Met, they had a specific rule that if you're going to use the audio guide, you would have to use headphones because they said that it would ruin the experience for other people if you were playing with, with the speaker. And with the MFFA, it didn't really specifically say you could have headphones or not. And the surveillance of the Met was also very intense. So in the entrance, there were guards in every room and scanners before you entered in. So it wasn't a very like inviting space to begin with. And at the Met, there was also limited or liberal visibility when it came to signs of photography or recording. And in my case, I was taking a picture or recording something, and then a guard had to like hound me down to tell me to delete it in front of them. So that wasn't a very encouraging experience for me. So surprising points of this research was with the MMFA and its audio component, and it's also inclusive ways of doing it with the celebrities and also just information. And they had both technology as well as description. So it felt much more inclusive in the choices that you can do for understanding the work. One thing I did appreciate at the Met was that they did have assistive listening in certain exhibitions or certain videos in the work. So people with hearing aids or people who had limited hearing could also enjoy the experience without having to change their hearing aids or hear the background noise in the back, because it could be very loud and busy in certain exhibitions. To conclude, so based off my experience and my data, the facade, surveillance, access, and the required knowledge to make they make museums much more like an exclusive space rather than an inclusive one. So I urge the audience to consider their experience the next time you visit a museum and ask yourself, how did it make you feel? Was it inviting? Or consider my exercise the next time you decide to go to a museum or any space, and thinking about accessibility in that way. Thank you.